Tonight's story is The Girl That Stood on the Grave. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. They were having a good time. They were doing things that teenagers do, some good, some bad. They were talking about a graveyard down the street, one that was full of superstition and stories. They were talking about how scary this place was. And one of the boys started telling all the people at the party that if you go and stand on one of these graves, that the person inside will grab a hold of you and pull you inside with them. So of course this got all the kids at the party very interested, except for one girl. She come up, she says, "You know what? I think that's a bunch of bull. I don't think that's true at all." He said, "Of course it is. And if you don't believe me, I will give you $100 to go stand on this grave tonight." The girl said, "Okay, I don't believe you, so I'll take your $100, I'll take your bet, I'll go down to that graveyard, and I'll stand on that grave and prove you wrong." So the girl took the $100. The boy handed her a knife. He says, "Take this knife with you to the graveyard. You stick this in the grave that you stand on before you leave, so that we all know that you were there and you're not just playing around with us." So the girl took his knife. She took his $100. She headed on down the street in the dark to the graveyard. She gets to the graveyard. It's all dark and creepy. Owls, all kinds of creepy crawlies, all kinds of sounds. The girl's very nervous. She keeps telling herself, "This is okay. There's nothing to be afraid of, is there?" But of course she knew in her mind, okay, this is just a bet. All I gotta do is go stand on the grave, stick this knife in there so they all know that I was there. So she gets to the graveyard. She finds a grave. She stands on it. She sticks the knife in the ground. She turns around to leave, but lo and behold, she can't move. Someone has got a hold of her. She's standing there in the graveyard all alone, screaming, yelling to the top of her lungs, but nobody can hear her. Meanwhile, back at the party, everyone is having a good time. The boy who handed her the knife and gave her the bet earlier, he starts wondering, well, where's this girl? She's not back yet. Did she go? So everybody at the party leaves. They all head to the graveyard to see if she had indeed went and stuck the knife in the grave. They get there. She's laid out on the grave, dead. Of course, no one come out of the grave and tried to pull her inside. What had happened indeed was she had stuck the knife in the ground like she was supposed to let everyone know she had indeed been there. But when she done that, she stuck it into her skirt. So when she stood up to leave, she thought someone from inside the grave had a hold of her, and she died of fright.
My name is Nate. About a week ago, I agreed to help my girlfriend's grandma around the house. My girlfriend, Genevieve, was the only one who really spoke to her grandma, Audrey. Audrey had been complaining about needing help with spring cleaning, but no one was around, and Jenny was often too busy with her schoolwork to see her grandmother. Once Audrey offered to pay someone, Jenny got me involved. I agreed to go help Audrey the following weekend, and Jenny gave me her address. That weekend came fast, and it was time for me to go meet Audrey. When I arrived, I was met with a small and well-kept house that was painted a pale pink color and had bright pink and purple flowers growing outside. It definitely looked like a typical grandma house. I went and knocked on the door once, and the door swung wide open before I had a chance to knock a second time. In front of me stood a short, elderly woman with long, frizzy white hair. She had a large nose, and her dark brown eyes looked almost black. "You must be Nathan. Come in." She didn't wait for my response, and quickly turned and walked to the right. I walked in, shutting the door behind me. I went to the right to catch up with Aubrey and found myself in a small living room. It had a small floral print couch and a rocking chair surrounding a coffee table covered in dried flowers. There were also bookshelves covered in dusty knickknacks, and all of the knickknacks looked a bit strange. I tried not to pay too much attention to them. Audrey led me to the kitchen. As I looked around, I felt I had stepped into an apothecary. There were houseplants hanging in the window, small pots with succulents scattered around the counters, and glass jars filled with more random dried ingredients than I could count. There was so much green in the room, the electronics like the refrigerator and the stove looked out of place. The only semblance of normal I saw in the room was a brownish-red bundt cake that was sitting in a cake display. It looked like a couple of slices had been taken from it already. When I was looking around, Audrey had taken a seat and was writing something on some paper in front of her. I sat down across the table from her and waited for her to acknowledge me again. Eventually she finished writing and passed me the paper. It was a list of things that needed to be done, and it was written in a strange red ink that was mottled with brown spots. The first thing that was listed was the attic. She showed me where the attic was, and as I climbed the ladder, she shouted up to me, "If you see any dolls, leave them there, but I want everything else out." It seemed like a strange request, but it wasn't my business. I was only there because I was getting paid for it. I worked for a while carrying boxes down the ladder, and eventually I'd cleared everything except the back of the attic. There I found the dolls that Audrey had mentioned. Each one looked like a fragile porcelain doll, but something about them was completely unnerving. Each doll looked completely unique, as if it had been modeled by real people or something. Even their clothes looked realistic. Most of them looked like they had stepped out of the early 2000s. There were at least a dozen of the creepy things, some men, some women. I found myself staring at them, wondering how a doll could ever look so real. Eventually, I snapped out of it and returned my focus to cleaning the attic. After I had moved everything besides the dolls, I went downstairs to find Audrey. I ended up in the kitchen and found the note on the table. "Gone for a walk. Keep cleaning." It was written in the same strange red-brown ink from earlier, though I thought this note looked more brown than red. I noticed her pen had fallen on the floor, and when I picked it up, it looked slightly translucent, and the ink inside was a dark red, and it was very viscous. It seemed kind of creepy and weird, so I just set it down on top of Audrey's note and pulled the to-do list out of my pocket. Next up was the hall closet. As Audrey had instructed, I pulled everything out of the closet and transported it to the living room. Every time I went in the living room, I noticed another one of her strange little knickknacks. A black cat with red eyes that seemed to just follow you, a skull with vampire teeth, and most recently I had seen a small picture frame with a map of Romania inside, and a red circle around Transylvania. I really wish I could stop noticing all these strange little things around Audrey's home. Once I returned to the closet, I found one last item in it, a cardboard box with a lid on it. I picked up the box, and it was heavier than I expected. I ended up dropping it. When I did, the lid slipped off, revealing a box of bones. I couldn't tell if they were real or not, but I didn't want to find out, especially since I could see what looked like a human skull in the corner. I put the lid back on the box and carefully moved it to the living room. I tried to forget about the box and moved on to the next task, cleaning the basement. Before I went to the basement, however, Audrey stopped me to asked me to meet her in the kitchen. She was in the middle of making something when I came in, as there were bowls and utensils scattered around the kitchen. I also noticed two of her jars on the counter were completely empty now, and in front of them sat what looked like a mortar and pestle. A cutting board sat on the table, and it looked like it was covered in sliced peaches. There was also a strong bitter scent in the air that seemed familiar, but I couldn't identify. "You need my flashlight before you go down there. The light bulb blew and I haven't gotten a new one yet." She pulled up in one of her drawers and handed me a small red flashlight. I took it and quickly left to go downstairs. When I went to the basement, I found the stairs were old and wooden, and they creaked with every step. When I walked down, I noticed several cobwebs, and the steps themselves seemed to be coated in dust. I stepped out onto the concrete floor and shined the flashlight around. The whole basement seemed to be empty minus the random cobwebs and spiders that hung from the ceiling. As I shined the light around, I found nothing of interest until I found a rust-brown colored spot on the floor. And as I walked closer to it, I could smell this familiar scent of blood. I quickly shined the light around again and found nothing more except this apparent blood spot on the floor. I decided to clean the cobwebs and then head home. Audrey's place was unnerving at first glance, but it got worse and worse the more I digged. I soon finished dusting the basement and went to the kitchen to tell Audrey I was leaving and see if I could get out of returning tomorrow. I found her sitting at the table with a huge bag of apples beside her. She had 2 large bowls in front of her, one filled with apple slices and another small one filled with the apple seeds. She thanked me for my help as she kept cutting apples, and she said she would see me tomorrow. She said she also had a surprise for me, and Jenny would be there tomorrow as well. I found some relief knowing that Jenny would be coming, and I would also get paid tomorrow. The evening came and went, and I woke up early on Sunday. I once again headed to Audrey's, though this time I was filled with anxiety and a bit of dread. I knocked on the pale pink door and opened it to the sight of Audrey walking away. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a bright orange cake in front of her, covered in pale pink icing. The kitchen smelled sickeningly sweet today. I sat down and glanced around the kitchen. Everything seemed to be back in its place, though. I could have sworn she didn't have this many plants yesterday. As I was pondering the plant life of the kitchen, I heard the front door swing open, and footsteps that got louder until I saw Jenny walk through the kitchen door. I got up to hug her, and we both sat down with Audrey. We sat and talked for a while, and Audrey served us cake while we chatted. Jenny chose to eat the bundt cake that had been sitting on the counter for who knows how long, and I chose the cake that Audrey had apparently made yesterday. She said it was peach, and that was one of my favorites. I absentmindedly ate while we talked, and one time when I looked down at the cake, I noticed it was filled with small black specks of something. I chose to ignore it because the cake was delicious, though it was quite rich and extremely sweet. Suddenly, I felt myself zone out. My vision seemed to blur, and the world seemed unreal. I felt myself start leaning to the side, but I couldn't get my muscles to move to fix it. Gravity took over, and I fell to the floor. I couldn't move, and the entire room seemed white. Out of nowhere, I felt my whole body start to tremble and shake violently. My limbs flew everywhere, and I had no control. I tried to scream for help, but I couldn't remember how to speak, so I flailed helplessly with my mouth wide open. It seemed like it went on for years, but eventually the shaking stopped. My vision slowly cleared, and I could make out Jenny leaning in front of me. She was holding something, but I couldn't quite see it. Jenny, shh. Everything's okay. You're fine now. As she spoke, I was able to see her in her hands a large knife and a wine glass, and on her face was a sinister smile I had never seen before. Don't worry, this won't hurt much. She moved the knife to my throat, giggling as she did so, and I heard Audrey chuckling with her. I hope you enjoyed your peach cyanide cake, Nate. After that, I could hear Audrey leave the room. I refocused on Jenny. She set the wine glass in front of my chest. She shifted her hand with the knife and brushed her other hand across my face. Good night, sweet prince.
The story tonight for me is called Best Friends. Beth and Tiffany were the best of friends. They had been friends since they were 5 years old. They'd done everything together. They grew up together since they were little. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, they had grew up together. I just deleted that, but that's okay. They did everything together. They graduated high school. This was the summer that they had graduated high school. They were both 17, about to turn 18. Tiffany's mom and dad had went on vacation to celebrate their anniversary. So they invited Beth over to stay with Tiffany while they were gone for the weekend. So the two girls, they had the greatest weekend. They had started out, they spent the days at the pool. They went to the mall in the afternoon, did typical things that, teenage girls would do. They would go on double dates with their boyfriends at night. So this was the last night of their weekend. The two girls had went out with their boyfriends to the drive-in. The two guys had dropped both the girls off at Tiffany's house. And the two girls changed in their pajamas. They went upstairs. They had gotten, Tiffany had two little twin beds in her room. And they had both crawled into the twin beds and were laying there talking about the events that had happened that night. Talking about how much fun they had. Talking about their future plans. Until Tiffany suggested she would go downstairs and get some snacks. So Beth was like, yeah, go get some snacks. I'm a little hungry. I didn't really eat that much in front of the guys. So Tiffany heads downstairs. She's gone about 5 or 10 minutes. Beth's laying upstairs in the twin bed, looking up at the ceiling, just kind of daydreaming. And then she hears, out of the blue, this loud scream. And this just makes her jump straight up out of the bed. She just like, oh, just that kind of scare. So she yells down, Tiffany, are you okay? Are you okay? She hears nothing. So she gets up. She yells downstairs. She's like, Tiffany, are you okay? Answer me. So, of course, she hears nothing back from Tiffany. So Beth grabs a softball bat that's behind Tiffany's door, and she's got it up to her, and she's kind of edging her way down the hall, and she gets to the top of the steps. And she looks down, porch lights on, the living room lights on, everything's on downstairs. Looks like nothing's going on. So she yells down again. She says, Tiffany, are you okay? What's going on? She hears nothing. So Beth creeps down the steps with the baseball bat in her hand, and her hands are all sweaty, and she's about to drop the baseball bat. She's so scared. But she's holding on with all her might to that baseball bat. So finally she makes her way to the bottom of the steps. She looks around. Dining room, lights on. She looks down the hall. Kitchen, lights on, everything looks fine. But no sign of Tiffany. So Beth makes her way down the hall to the kitchen. She looks out. The back door is kind of open. So she looks out the back door, wind's blowing, dogs barking crazy. And to her horror, she sees blood all over the back porch, just like everywhere. So she screams and runs to the kitchen and grabs the phone, and she picks it up. She realizes, oh no, the phone's dead. So she knew right then she couldn't call 911 or the police or anything. So she grabs the keys off the counter and takes off running down the hall as fast as she could to make it to the front door, out the steps to her car. But too bad for Beth, as she was running down the hall, a dark, closed-looking figure jumps out of the hallway closet, tackles her to the ground, and they're wrestling and fighting. Well, Beth finally kicks the person off her. She can't see who it is or anything. Okay, lost y'all a minute. Okay, so she rolls Beth over on her back. Beth's laying there, eyes closed, just waiting for something to happen. And nothing ever does. All that she does hear is the sound of her best friend, Tiffany, just laughing as loud as she can. Hysterical. This is the ultimate prank. So you can imagine what Beth called her, the B word, all this stuff. Well, a couple of minutes later, they're fine, laughing, joking about it, thinking it's the funniest thing ever. Oh yeah, you got me. This is the ultimate prank. So a couple hours go by. The girls are still upstairs, talking, hanging out. Well, Tiffany suggests, I'm going to go downstairs and get some cocoa. I want something sweet. Beth is like, okay, you do that. And she's thinking, okay, you're not going to get me again. Tiffany runs downstairs. You prankster, Tiffany. You go downstairs, make that cocoa. But you just, yeah. So Beth's laying there, and she's looking up at the ceiling again, same thing as before. Hears the loudest scream. This time she just really jumps out of her skin. And she's like, oh my God, you got me again. But no, you're not going to get me again. I'm going to stay right here. She hears all these pots and pans rustle around, all this stuff, commotion downstairs. She leans over, gets her headphones, puts them in her ears, lays down. Next thing she knows, she wakes up. It's a couple hours later. She looks at the clock next to the bed. She turns on the light next to the bed, looks over. Tiffany's not there. So she gets up. And she's just laughing. Ha ha, you really got me this time. You really think you did, or at least. So she goes just running down the steps to find her. Well, when she gets down there, all the lights in the house are off. Porch lights off. Everything's off. There's no sign of Tiffany anywhere. So Beth's looking all around, just like, well, okay, this is kind of strange. So then she looks over into the living room, and the moon's shining in, and she can see something, a silhouette of someone sitting in a chair. Well, it's Tiffany. She sees her, the edge of her nightgown, her ruffling. So she goes marching over to her, grabs her on the shoulder. She goes, you're going to stop playing these jokes on me, you know. Well, she feels Tiffany's shoulder is soaking wet. Just soaking. So Beth starts trembling. She just realizes then something is really wrong. So she kind of moves her hand up Tiffany's shoulder, up her neck, and to her horror, like just freak out, almost die of fright, she moves her hand up a little further. All she feels is this bloody stump. No head. Head's gone. And Beth just stands there in total terror. And that's the end.
So I hope that I can tell this story to the same magnitude that I experienced it. So my story tonight is called Timmy, and it is a true experience that happened to me as a child. So, you're so funny. So I grew up in Maryland, and Maryland is known for, there's a lot of activity in Maryland. We have the Antietam battlefield. You're not far from Gettysburg. And Harper's Ferry, if you know Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. I live just outside of that. So in telling this story, I just want to set the tone that I did live in an area that was full of paranormal activity. It was my very first experience. I was 5 years old, and my parents lived in an old farmhouse. And this farmhouse they rented, it was down a really long lane. There was a lot of land, and on this land there was a very large pond. It was like the perfect spot to have a family. Lots of area to play. I had, at the end of my lane were the people who owned that house. And there were some kids that lived there, and they rode the school bus with me. And so it was like the perfect setting of, you got to play outside. My parents didn't have to worry about me going down the street or cars or anything. And we had a dog, and his name was Sambo, and he was a Doberman. And I lived in that house with my mom, my dad, and my 2-year-old brother, Josh. So outside, I was playing one day, and past the pond, I heard a very faint laugh. It sounded like child laughter. And I wanted to play with them. I thought that there were kids down there. I that I wanted to go be with other kids. My mom was like, no, Ryan, there's not kids down there. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't hear anything. You're not going down the street. She said it was probably just the kids down the lane that you rode the bus with, and you're not playing with them. So I remember sitting in the yard, and I remember just hearing it over and over again. Laughter, laughter. And just wondering, like, where are they, first of all, and why can't I play with them? It wasn't long, and it was like days had gone by, and I remember being outside one day, and it was summer. And I heard the faint laughter. But this time it was different. It was far away, and then in the next breath, it was right next to my ear. It scared me to a point where I remember the goosebumps. It was the very first time that I ever was scared like that. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why. I froze. After the laughter in my ear, it fell back behind the pond again. It was far away, and it would do that back and forth. And it almost became as if it was laughing at me. I went inside. I didn't want to go back outside and play. My parents would say, you need to get outside, you need to go outside. I didn't want to. I would cry. It became a situation where I didn't want to be anywhere outside. I didn't want to go down the lane. I didn't want to be with the kids down the street. I felt just a fright that I can't explain. It wasn't long, and that laughter turned into touch. All of a sudden, I remember one time I felt cold hands, and they were on my face. And it would be like just like a pulling on my face. I would still hear laughter, but then I began to feel this cold touch to my skin. Again, I cried to my parents. They were telling me I was telling stories. I even went to my teacher at school. My teacher called my parents. I was punished for that. That turned into laying in bed at night and feeling my covers being pulled from my skin. To tell you I was petrified is an understatement. I never in my life had experienced anything like this before. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I've experienced it since. One night, I was laying in bed, and I would be so frightened that I would just want to fall asleep really quickly. It didn't happen to me every night. There were days that would go by that nothing happened. But every time it did happen, I remember it always just being very scared, horrifying. I would cry, I would scream. My parents would come into my room. They would tell me I was just trying to get attention, that I wanted to sleep with them in their bed. I just didn't want to go to bed. No one believed me. And everyone I told, an adult, you're supposed to tell adults when things are going wrong, told my parents, and I was punished every single time. Well, one night I went to bed, and at the end of the hallway was my bedroom. So there was this long hallway, and then it was my room, and I would sleep with the door open. And there was a nightlight in my hallway. And I heard a voice, and he said, Ryan, come on, let's go outside and play. Come on, Ryan. And so I sat straight up, and there stood a little boy. He was dirty, muddy, and wet. He had no shoes. He had a white and red striped shirt. His face was covered in mud. His hair was wet, and his pants were jeans, and they were cut off at the knees. He knew my name. I immediately went under the covers. I was too scared to scream, and when I looked back up, he was gone. I already knew I couldn't tell my parents. So for the next few nights, he repeatedly came back to my room. He never walked in my room. He always stood on this spot that we had on our carpet, and he would repeatedly say my name. Ryan, come out and play with me. Come on. Come on, Ryan. Let's go play. For the longest time, it never went away. I would cry myself to sleep. I was exhausted when I went to school. I couldn't eat. I was sick. I would have stomach bug. I would do everything I could to just figure out how to cope. There was a night, I guess it was a morning, that my family was having breakfast. It was a Saturday or a Sunday. And I remember it was both my mom and my dad and my brother. And I think we were having like pancakes or something. And we were sitting there and we were eating, and you heard feet running across the floor and a ball bounce. I remember looking at my mom, who immediately dropped her fork and said to my dad, "Go upstairs." She grabbed me, pulled me into a corner, and by accident left my brother sitting in the high chair at the table. She was yelling at my dad, get Joshua, get Joshua. We got into the corner of the kitchen. My father went upstairs with an axe. We heard it go down this way, and then the feet and the ball went this way. My father went upstairs with the axe. Why an axe? I'm not sure, but he did. He comes back downstairs, and he said there was nothing. I immediately said, "It's Timmy." My mom's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "The little boy that stands on the spot on the carpet. That's the little boy that stands on the spot on the carpet. That's Timmy, and he wants to play with me." She said, no, it's the dog. Well, I knew that the dog was on the porch, so I knew it wasn't the dog, but I knew who it was. That night, nothing happened. The next night, he came back. I was less afraid, and I think I was less afraid because my parents knew. I covered my face, I hid under the covers, and I just waited for him to go away. I cried to my dad. I said, "Please, Dad, do something." He said, "Okay." So my father cut a big hole in the carpet. And I never saw Timmy again.
The story tonight is called The Hidden. It's written by a guy named KMA Pak. I don't know much about him, but tonight we're going to be retelling the story, reimagining it as if the main character, he's on an abandoned farm, and he's currently being questioned by the police from what he witnessed in relation to some misappearing women that went missing on the farm. And he's just giving his eyewitnessing tale to what happened. Okay. And with that said, this is called The Hidden. Okay. Where do you want me to start? Okay, then, the girl. I started to wake up after somebody had bashed me on the back of my head. The last thing I really remember was somebody counting down backwards from 10, 9, 8, 7. As my eyes came to, that's really when the horror really set in of what had happened. I jumped to my feet. Panicked, I screamed, "Where are you?" I searched all throughout this abandoned farm, but I couldn't find her anywhere. Not in the house, not in the old barn. I ended up in this strange field. As I scoured the land, I tripped over this mound of dirt. As I was getting up, I realized, abandoned farm, mound of dirt. She had been buried. I started digging as fast as I could, picking up piles and piles of dirt, until I got to this really hard spot. It kind of felt like wood. I put my head down to it. I said, "Are you in there?" I put my ear down just to see what I could hear. All I could hear was her murmuring cries, as if she was crying out to me. She was so terrified. I kept digging more and more, but I realized there wasn't enough time. What if she had run out of air? I noticed a shed not too far in the distance, so I sprinted as fast as I could to the shed. I ended up breaking down the door. Inside, I saw a shovel. It was still caked in dirt. I thought surely that was the same one that bastard had buried her with. I grabbed it and I ran back and started digging as fast as I could, now with purpose. Digging and digging, until finally, a wooden box appeared. I threw down the shovel, ripped open the crate, and there she was. Man, she just stared back at me. Her eyes were so wide. She had been bound and gagged. But luckily she was alive. Oh, how I sighed with relief. That meant the game was still on. Thank God. You know, as I looked back down at her, as pathetic as she looked, a single tear started to stream down my face, too. As I reached into my pocket and grabbed my rag and chloroform, I looked down at her and slowly placed it over her face. She struggled, but she ended up going right back to sleep. I tossed her body over my shoulders and headed back to our truck. That's when I met my brother. He said, "Ah, hell, you found her." I said, "Of course I did. What'd you expect?" Although he did almost get me. He asked me, "What about the other girl, then?" I pointed this direction, towards the old creek in the woods. I said, "Somewhere in that direction, brother. Although I hear drowning has been pretty bad this season." He asked, "No countdown from 10 this time?" I told him there probably wasn't any time left, and he just sprinted right off. Man, you gotta love adult hide-and-go-seek, don't ya? Listen, if you folks are looking for my brother, you're gonna have to play by his games. And trust me, they're a lot worse than mine.
My story tonight is called The Babysitter. The 16-year-old Jenny Jeffers, she was having the best summer ever. She was hanging out with her friends. She had went to the mall one day with her friends. They were shopping, having a great time. They sit down to have lunch, and the most popular was having. They were all super excited to be invited, especially Jenny, because he had asked her to be her date for the party. So the girls immediately went out, scattered, went to all the shops she could afford. So she didn't end up getting anything. One of her friends suggested that she get a job babysitting so she could work a little bit and get some money to get her dress, and she gave her a flyer that she found earlier that day for someone who was looking for a babysitter. So when Jenny got home that night, she called the number. This really nice lady picked up the phone. They had a really nice conversation. The lady's name was Mrs. Hagan. She told Jenny that she had a 5-year-old son and she was just looking for a babysitter once a week while her and her husband went out on date night. After their conversation, Mrs. Hagan told Jenny, she said, "You know, usually I don't hire people until I meet them in person, but I just have a really great feeling about you. So I want to offer you the job." Jenny was so excited. She accepted it. The night finally come where she went to babysit. Her mom had to work at the diner. Her mom was a single mother, so she couldn't take Jenny. So Jenny took the bus. The bus dropped her off in front of the Hagens' residence because the driveway was a long, crooked driveway up a hill. So Jenny walked up the drive by herself in the night. She gets to the top of the hill to where the house is, and she's kind of reluctant about going in because the house is kind of old looking and scary. no lights or anything. But Jenny goes in anyway, knocks on the door. She's standing there, and she hears all this yelling, commotion inside. Sounds like things are being thrown around. And then all of a sudden, the door just flies open, and there's Mrs. Hagen smiling like nothing had happened inside. And she gave Jenny a hug, brought her in. Donnie, the little boy, come running up to Jenny. Immediately, they hit it off. Mr. Hagen come in, and he just kind of stares at Jenny. She introduces herself. He doesn't say anything back. He's just kind of weird, pretty much. So Mrs. Hagen and little Donnie show Jenny around the house. Mrs. Hagen gives Jenny money for pizza, and the Hagens go off on their date night. So Jenny and Donnie are there having a great time. They're playing games. They order pizza. Then Donnie wants to play hide and seek. So Jenny's like, okay, we'll play hide and seek. So Donnie goes and hides, and Jenny starts to count. When she gets to 8, the telephone rings. So she goes to answer it, and it's a man's voice on the other end, and he is kind of talking kind of weird, kind of twisted, saying all kinds of perverted stuff to her, and she just hangs up the phone. Pizza's here. So she goes to the door, she opens the door, and she's totally surprised to see Chuck, the guy that asked her out earlier, standing there with the pizza. So they're just both kind of shocked to see each other. And so they're on the porch talking, hanging out, and he's like, so do you live here? And before she could even finish, she runs in the house, calling for Donnie, because she forgot they were playing hide and seek. So she's looking everywhere, she can't find him. And Chuck's helping her look, and they can't find him. And like 30 or 40 minutes pass by, and she's about ready to call his parents, but they pull in. So she goes outside and tells them, she said, we're playing hide and seek. I lost track of time. I don't know where he's at. So the father, he's just pissed off. He starts cussing, runs in the house. The mother, she smiles, and she's like, oh, he does this all the time. So she goes in, and she's like, yells a little code out, and he comes crawling out of the dryer. And she's like, we have this code when we're playing hide and seek, and he does this all the time if I can't find him because he hides so good. So Jenny's first night babysitting was kind of a wreck. Mr. Hagen took her home that night, and on the way back to her house, she tried to initiate conversation. He wouldn't never really say anything. She tried to apologize for scaring them, but he still wouldn't say anything. So he pulls up to her house. She gets out of the car. She says once again that she's sorry, but before she can even say anything, he spins off, squealing tires. So a week passes by, and she goes back to babysit again. This time, watching movies. They start watching a movie, and Donnie falls asleep. So Jenny's sitting there by herself while he's sleeping, and she turns it to a horror movie. And she's sitting there watching this movie, and then all of a sudden, the telephone rings, and she goes to answer it, and it's that same caller that had called the week before, telling kind of obscene stuff, talking real dirty to her, and she just hangs up. Phone starts ringing once again, but this don't really scare her. What scares her is she looks down the hall and sees that the back door is open. And immediately she thinks Donnie's got up and wandered out. So she runs into the living room, but he's still laying there. And she rushes back to the hallway, and she's totally terrified when she sees that the back door is closed, and now the front door is wide open. So she grabs a butcher knife out of the kitchen and goes out on the porch and starts yelling who's out there, trying to, figure out what's going on. And right as she gets ready to yell out again, somebody grabs her from behind, and they start wrestling to the ground. She drops her knife, and her attacker rolls her over on her back and starts laughing. It's Chuck. And he's like, I just had to see you again, and I just wanted to pick with you, and all this stuff. And then he leans down and he kisses her. And so they're kind of laying on the porch, just kind of making out. And headlights. The Hagens are home. They catch her on the porch. Neither one of them are happy at this point because she's on the porch kissing, making out with a guy. Their son's in there laying down with a horror movie on TV. So Mr. Hagen, he's just had it. He fires Jenny, cusses her out, and Chuck takes her home that night. So a week passes by. Jenny's just kind of going along with her life. She's been fired from babysitting. She didn't get enough money to get her dress, but she's going to figure out a way to get it. And one night she's laying in her bed and she gets a call, and she answers it, and it's Mr. Hagen. And he's very nice this time. He's never been nice to her, and he's said that he apologizes for the way he treated her. He hopes that she'll come back. All this really nice stuff. So, hey, so she does go back. There's fireworks going on. It's 4th of July. Lightning. They go out on their date night. This night's just really different. Donnie's not his normal self. He don't really want to watch nothing. She puts him to bed early. And as she's closing his bedroom door, the phone starts to ring. Well, she's all the way upstairs on the 2nd floor. So she walks into the Hagen's bedroom, and my light's probably going to die in a minute. Sees a newspaper clipping sticking out of a box. So she kind of opens the box lid, and she sees that there's all these articles in this box about a babysitter murderer who is actually from the town that the Hagens were from. And as she's starting to look at the newspaper, Mr. Hagen walks in and catches her, and he asks her what she's doing, and she just kind of brushes it off. So he decides and that they had a babysitter who wasn't watching them properly, and that the little sister had actually drowned in the bathtub. So he went to a full rage and murdered the babysitter, and they had to move away from the town before anybody figured out it was him. So Jenny's in full terror at this point, and she's trying to get out of the car, and he won't let her. They pull up to a rock quarry. He pulls her out of the car, tries to throw her over the edge, and Chuck runs out of nowhere because he had followed them, and him and Mr. Hagen, they had this big fight, and he throws Mr. Hagen over the ledge. So a week later, Jenny and Chuck go to that 4th of July party, and Jenny is in that new dress.
The hall closet. My name is Melinda. I just moved across town from a tiny apartment to a small but cozy brick house. My commute for work had been cut in half. My job admittedly was boring and life-draining, but the one thing that kept me going and happy was my beautiful black cat, Gigi. I had found Gigi abandoned in a thrift store parking lot when she was just a tiny kitten. When I took her to the vet, they told me she was just a few weeks old, far too young to be away from her mother. So I bottle-fed her every night for weeks. I watched her grow from a tiny, helpless thing into my sassy, noisy, and lovable cat. Unfortunately, Gigi was not taking the move well. As soon as I brought her into our new home, she froze in place with nothing moving but her tail. She clearly wasn't happy. I told her everything would be okay and began unpacking. That was 1 week ago, and it was also the last time I saw my beloved Gigi. Gigi had a problem with her paws, and she was unable to retract her claws. The whole house has wooden or tile floors, and whenever I am home, I hear the quiet click-clack of her nails on the floor, but I still can't find my Gigi. Unpacking and looking for my cat has kept me quite busy. It's also kept me from digging deeper into one of the mysteries of the house. A small closet in the hall that's locked from the inside, and there's no key to be found anywhere. I keep meaning to look for a key, or even attempt to pick the lock, but I've been occupied by other things. Today, I decided I will make it my mission to find out about the hall closet. Hours later, I found myself pacing back and forth in front of the hall closet. I had attempted to pry it open, left, and came back to it several times. While cleaning, I found an unusually large clump of black fur in several spots around the house. I was getting really concerned about Gigi, but every now and then I could still hear her click-clack on the tile floor in another part of the house. I assumed she was still protesting the move and avoiding me because of that. I had also looked for her several times, but had no luck once again. So eventually I found myself back at the closet. I watched a video on simple lockpicking and felt confident in my abilities to do it. I took my tools and got to work in front of the door. After a few minutes I heard a strange click, and the knob was able to turn. I threw my tools aside and slowly opened the closet door, feeling a bit anxious about what might be inside. When the hall light reached the inside of the closet, I could see it was bare except for large clumps of black fur and a perfectly arranged animal skeleton. As I looked at it, I saw it was a cat skeleton, specifically a cat skeleton with deformed paws. It was my Gigi. She was gone, completely hidden away from me. I wondered how long she had been there, and before my tears started to fall, my blood ran cold. I heard click-clacks on the tile floor of the kitchen, heading straight towards me.
We'll know that we told the story of The Hidden, which was about two brothers who had kidnapped two women and had taken them to an abandoned farm and ended up playing adult hide-and-go-seek with their bodies. Well, tonight, this telling is going to tell what transpired before that happened, before the brothers led them to their doom. Before the events that unfolded that night, the brother that we heard from last time, he had broken into a woman's home, the same woman that he would later kidnap and leave by the creek in the woods for his brother to find as a sinister part of their games. The woman, before she was kidnapped, had been preparing dinner for her and her husband in her home. The brother broke into the home, tied her to the kitchen chair, had leisure and made himself dinner and a glass of wine, and decided to tell her all the different stories about what happened to her that night. With that said, this is The Hidden, the prequel. You know, this is very good, I have to tell you. Ooh, can't forget the wine. You must be wondering why I haven't killed you yet. You know, I was starting to wonder that myself. Not sure, really. Usually I just do it. But for fun, of course. Takes less than a second, really. Then you're gone. Forgotten. And on to the next. You know, you had a friendly, very friendly next-door neighbor, I have to tell you. Jane, was it her name? Very, very charming lady. Very chatty. I'm sure my brother's already gotten to her by now, too. You know, with you, though, it's very different. You're special, you know that. I don't know why. Why I can't just kill you now. I mean, I have no feelings for you whatsoever. I don't know you, obviously. We've never met. Very strange, I'm sure. Should I just let you go then? Well, what do you think? You seem to like that idea, don't you? You think you should live. Well, maybe I should just walk right out of here then. You'd like that? That's definitely something you should hope for, isn't it? To think some psycho was just about to kill you, right? It's not a story you could tell your friends, I'm sure. Cheers. No. I have to at least almost kill you. Relax. Loosen up a bit. Pardon my frankness. Even great athletes sometimes have an off night. But letting you go doesn't make a star player out of me, now does it, like my brother? Oh, he's gonna like you a lot. You know, I usually forget these things, these interactions beforehand. But with you, like I said, you're special. I think I'm going to remember you just fine. In fact, definitely. Shut up! Quiet! Shut your mouth!
Is the ghost of Amelia Earhart. On July 2nd, 1937, World War IX female aviator Amelia Earhart disappeared on her final flight to Howland Island. It's a tiny island off the Pacific, halfway between New Guinea and Hawaii, on her second attempt to be the first woman to fly around the world. As they scheduled, the time grew closer, so my light did die, so I do apologize for that, but the show must go on. So, as her scheduled arrival flight grew closer and people around the world waited, any moment, the world's most adored aviator would emerge from the clouds and land on a strip especially made for her. Her last confirmed words were, "We must be on you, but cannot see you," and then wait. And for more than 80 years, the world has waited, until now. My name is Mark Cruz. Back in 1987, I had just turned 30 years old and was asked to accompany a skilled pilot named James Conway as he chartered the same exact flight as Amelia did back in 1937. I'm no pilot by no means. I'm an expert on a national radio direction finder, the same kind that Amelia used back in 1937, but was not familiar with. Many people believe that is why she ultimately lost her way, because her original radio tech partner dropped out right before her trip. We were to leave the same airstrip Amelia did in Oakland, California, and arrive to Howland Island the same time Amelia was supposed to. After many days of press, celebrations, and a big send-off from the crowd, and we were back off on our way. Our first stop was Lee, New Guinea, to fill up on gas, just as Amelia did, and back in the air to cross 2,500 miles of ocean to get to Howland Island. Sometime in the night, James started complaining that he was having some chest pains and eventually slumped over in the driver's seat of the plane, and he was dead. I was in a total panic, naturally, radioing in to Howland Airstrip, but there was nothing they can do. I was trapped on a plane with a dead person without knowing how to fly the plane. In the middle of the night, it started to rain and I could see lightning in the distance. The plane was just soaring through the air. I sit back in my seat and close my eyes. I just knew that this was the end and I was gonna accept that. Thank you. The next thing that happened was unbelievable, and no one else knows this story except you. As my eyes opened, I could hear a woman's voice say, "Sir, where are we on the direction navigational system?" It was Amelia Earhart, sitting there flying the plane. At this point, I didn't care if it was Godzilla flying the plane. I just was ready to land and stay alive. I fumbled around and read her the locations. Excellent, we are right on line and will land shortly. She radioed it into Howland that this was Amelia Earhart and we would be landing soon. The operator on the other end said, "You've got to be kidding, this is a joke." While we soared through the dark skies, we had a nice conversation. She was completely aware that she was dead and she was a lost spirit, and she was completely at terms with that. For years, she had waited for this moment, this to present itself to her. The conversation we had was delightful. She told me about her childhood growing up, being a tomboy, jumping out of the barns, pretending to fly, always cutting up her dresses into pants because she hated girly clothes. She talked about her father drinking and losing all their money and how that shaped her in her adult years. I told her about the 80s, McDonald's, rock and roll, acid wash jeans. She was very interested in all that and delighted. She was completely at awe. And then I said, Amelia, can you tell me how you died? Well, she said, we ran out of gas and I landed the plane on the coral reef on Gardner Island, a tiny island. It was a rough landing and my partner Fred was very badly injured. I tried to get him out of the plane, but it was sinking so fast, and eventually I just had to leave him and swim to shore. So when I made it to shore, I collapsed on the sand and woke up the next day. I was for certain that someone would come and rescue me. I waited for days. I tried to make it as long as I could, but eventually I died of starvation and dehydration. I watched as the coconut crabs devoured my body and carried my bones to their caves. Amelia was happy to hear that she was still adored by the world, inspired by so many people, and that her search had never ended. We are coming up on Highland Island, she said to me and smiled. She had a nice kind of smile and a little gap between her teeth. She opened up a little purse and applied some freckle cream and red lipstick. Here we go, she said. We had landed. I'd never been more happy to be alive in my life. As soon as we stepped out on the strip, we were met by a big crowd. But there was something off. Everything was black and white, and we were definitely not in 1987 anymore. We were in 1937. The crowd lifted Amelia up in the air and whisked her off down the strip as she waved to her fans. She looked back at me one final time and said, thank you. The next thing I knew, I was standing there all alone. It wasn't sunny anymore. It was darkness on the airstrip. Rain hitting my face. I looked up into the sky and saw one shooting star shoot across the sky. Amelia had finally landed. The end.
Over the past year or so, my friends and I have taken to exploring abandoned locations. We looked into the old hotel, the abandoned Catholic church, and Jim's fishing hut, which went out of business before we were born. This weekend, we were going to tackle Melinda's home. About 7 years ago, there was a huge news story about this young woman who went missing without a trace. Melinda something, I don't know. I was a kid when it was big in the news. Her house was considered a crime scene for a couple of years, but nothing was ever found of her. Now it sat abandoned. Not even the homeless squatters would stay in the place. Unfortunately, this weekend Nate had told his girlfriend's family he would help them with something, so he'd be missing out. But Brandon, Jeremy, and myself, Jason, would all be going in and recording everything to show Nate and everyone at school. Friday night came fast, and we were at Jeremy's getting ready. Brandon and I had told our families we were staying with Jeremy tonight, but we were really here because he and Nate were the only ones old enough to drive, and Melinda's house was across town. The drive over there was quiet. Our other adventures had been so exciting, but this time felt different. I couldn't place if it was because Nate wasn't there or if something else was going on. Before I had much time to question it, we pulled up to the house. Outside it was covered in vines, and wrapped around nearby trees was faded police tape. Brandon had the camera, and I was in charge of finding a way in. I went around the house a couple of times, trying to open windows, doors, and looking to see if there was an outside entrance to a cellar. The house was in a much older part of town, so I thought there might be one. Unfortunately, I had no easy luck, and I decided the best plan would be my trusty lockpicking kit. Jeremy and Brandon followed me around back. Jeremy held a flashlight for me, and I got to work, easily opening the back door's lock in a couple of minutes. I carefully put my kit away and pulled out my own flashlight. When I opened the door, Brandon started recording. He narrated for us quietly. We've just opened the back door. We're about to get our first look inside. I moved aside and Brandon walked in, followed by Jeremy. I walked in and closed the door behind us. It looked like we were standing in a kitchen. There were spider webs everywhere, and it looked like some animal had made a nest on the kitchen counter. On one side of the kitchen stood a small dining room table and chairs, and on the other side was a dark hallway. As I shined my flashlight around the room, I spotted a black cat perched on another part of the kitchen counter. It meowed at me continuously, and as I moved through the room, it followed me on the counter. I heard a strange click-clack as it walked around. Nothing interesting here, just a kitchen, Brandon narrated for us, and he headed towards the hall. I went to follow, and the cat jumped down in front of me right before I went down the hall. It meowed at me, and when I moved close to it, it hissed at me. Did the cat hiss at you guys too? Jeremy turned to look back at me. What cat? I went to shine my flashlight on the cat, but it was gone. It was here just a second ago. I guessed it was just a stray that used the house as shelter. Immediately to the left was a small living room. It had a small amount of furniture, but still would have been cozy when the house was in good condition. Everything seemed completely normal, except near the door there were large clumps of black hair. Maybe the cat was shedding. We explored through several rooms in the house and didn't see anything strange. While we were in the office, though, Jeremy and Brandon were reading some of the papers on the desk, and I was looking at the bookshelf. On top of the bookshelf appeared the cat again. This time I noticed it had a pink collar with a small name tag on it. Gigi. The cat sat there meowing and hissing at me, and this time it swatted its visibly deformed paws at me, like it was trying to tell me to go away. Guys, look at this cat. I held the flashlight in front of me, and I swear the cat vanished into thin air. Dude, what cat? Jeremy looked annoyed and headed out of the room. As we left the room, we noticed a door was open at the end of the hall. As we got closer to it, there was a terrible acrid smell. Dude, that's an effing body! Jeremy was ahead of me and Brandon. I opened the door further and saw what it was hiding. All over the floor and splashed up on the walls was the rusty brown stain of blood. On the floor lay a human skeleton and a mass of brown hair, balled up and tossed aside. We've got to go, man! Brandon turned and ran, heading towards the back door of the house, with Jeremy close behind. Something told me not to leave yet. I shined my light into what appeared to be the hall closet. There was a small animal skeleton. Its feet were deformed just like the cat's I had seen before. I carefully closed the closet door and stepped past the skeleton. There was one more room in the house to explore. It looked like this was Melinda's bedroom. It only contained a bed and a nightstand, and the floor was covered in the same clumps of black hair I had seen before. Behind me, I heard the click-clack of the cat's claws on the tile floor. I turned and shined my light at the door, expecting to see her standing there meowing at me. Instead, I found a mass of black, fuzzy limbs, and every time it moved, its fur fell off in clumps. I couldn't see any eyes or make out a face, but I did see large, menacing teeth that were clearly stained with old blood. It made the most blood-curdling screech and lashed out one of its many limbs towards me. I moved backwards as quickly as I could, falling onto the bed and clumsily crawling over to the other side. It moved into the room and seemed to take up more space as it got closer. I was absolutely trapped. I was backed into a wall, and when I thought I had no hope, I remembered I was standing in front of a window. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and swung at the glass with all of my might. Luckily, it shattered, and I crawled out as quickly as I could. I scrambled to my feet and into the car, covered in scratches and blood. Drive, man, effing drive! What a story we had to tell Nate on Monday.
Two-sided man. Be warned of the man beneath the hood, the black straggling veil, for he has a wicked tendency to tell you your untold future. He will ruin you, he will spite you with his words, and cast your truce at the palm of his hand. Be warned of the truth of this two-sided man. This book is stupid, said AJ, skimming through the pages. What book? I asked. Have a look at this, and he hands it over. Wow, this looks old. Yep, and he points to the title. The Two-Sided Man? What does that even mean? The cover of the book is dark red. The letters are dirty gold, embroidered with some sort of silvery color. I flip it open, warning, do not read this if you value your life. AJ, maybe we should put this back. What? You know, like back on the shelf where you got it? I close the lid and gently place it on the counter next to me. The library closes soon anyway, and I have to get home for dinner. Oh, I get it. He folds his arms and paces the floor. Get what? I said. You are scared. And he laughs. I put my hands up in the air. Well, yeah. How many books do you know that come with a warning? I'm not trying to die tonight. Mom's making pie, and I'd hate to drag the night out with my death, you know? Yeah, all right, fine. But one more thing before you go. What now? He picks the book up from the table and flips to a random page, scrolling his finger through the passages. The Two-Sided Man is not your friend. Come on, AJ, would you just cut it out? He seeks these words when they are read, till those that hear are long and dead. He stops and closes the book and drops it on the floor, scared. Yeah, you see what I mean? AJ stands there for a moment, staring off in the distance. Any chance I can sleep over at your house tonight? I don't know, man. Come on, pretty please. Okay, fine. But one condition. Anything. We go turn this book into the librarian, and then we never talk about it again. Done deal, said AJ. Okay, good. Now who's going to pick it up? AJ takes off his jacket, wraps it around the book, and we both head off to the front counter. A woman in a sharp knitted white cardigan approaches the desk. What do you want? Her tone snappy like the gum she's chewing. I look at AJ for a moment, then turn back to her. Well, we have a misplaced book. AJ empties his jacket onto the desk and then backs away. She picks the book up to examine it. Nope, this book isn't ours. Doesn't have a barcode. She slaps it back on the counter. Now you get going. It's getting late and I don't have time for this. What, your job? Says AJ. The woman got nasty with us and chased us out of the building with her rolled up newspaper, exactly like the movies. When we reached the corner, we stopped to catch our breath. Man, what a beep beep! AJ was interrupted by the sound of my mother's car horn. We both hopped in and said very little on the way home. Most of it was answering my mother's questions, like, did you have a good time? Yes. And we said yes to most of them just to pass the interrogation. When we got home, we all had a large slice of cherry pie. AJ went over to the fridge and indulged himself with an entire can of whipped cream. That kid is rude. Mom yells through the hall in the dining room. Hey, can you boys please take out the trash? Sure, Mom. Grab the trash bags, tie the red strings into knots, and we head out the door. The sound of the plastic takeout containers shrieking against our ears. A rustling sound emits from high up. Hey, what is that? AJ points to a large tree, its branches 5 times taller than us. I don't know, squirrel. We live in the city. No, someone's up there. I throw the trash in the bin and look up again. He's right. It looked like someone is dangling their feet above one of the top branches. But it's too dark to know for sure. Yeah, I think I see it. My voice was a little louder than I anticipated, and the feet from which we weren't sure were dangling had disappeared. AJ didn't say a word. He ran and let the door slam like a bad man, and I would have criticized if I wasn't right there behind him wailing like a baby. After a while, everything settled down. AJ and I made ourselves feel better by playing video games and drinking Mountain Dew. But an hour later, something happened. Boys, Mom yells from downstairs. Yeah, Mom. When we got downstairs, all the lights were off. Mom, where are you? Come into the kitchen. The voice no longer sounded like my mother's, rather than someone trying to sound like her. AJ stepped towards the dark frame of the kitchen and peeps around the corner. He nudges me in my shoulder. There's someone hovering over the sink. And I don't think it's your mom. What? Keep your voice down. It'll hear you like it did outside. AJ tips toe away from the frame. I lean over and have a look, the thing twitching its head over its shoulder. With 2 clicks, it looked back. AJ and I both ran up the stairs screaming until I ran into something. Boys, what is going on? It's late and you're still up? Get to bed now. Mom was upstairs the whole time. We think there's someone in the house. What do you mean? Well, downstairs, we saw something in the kitchen. AJ nods his head again, trembling in fear. Mom went downstairs to check it out. She comes back about 5 minutes later. There's no one in the house. Are you sure? Yes, I checked every room. Now go to bed. Mom pulls me off to the side before I could get to my room. Wait a second, sir. Yeah, Mom? What have I told you about reading scary books? What are you talking about? She pulls out the red-covered book from the library, the same one AJ and I dropped on the counter before we left. I found this on the porch, young man. One of you must have dropped it on your way to the house, and I expect this from AJ, but not from you. She flips through the book. The lies of the two-sided man will lure you to close. This is unacceptable. She slams the book shut. But, Mom, it's not our... I don't want to hear it. Get to your room. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door behind me. AJ huddled himself under every blanket that we had, petrified, his only words being, repeatedly, I wish I was in Disney World. Out of all things you've done, AJ, this is really crappy. What are you talking about? You brought that book back to the house even after I told you not to. I did not. Shut up. I know you did. My mom confronted me about it in the hall. AJ stands there with a confused look on his face, something I had only ever seen when he was telling the truth. I just didn't want to believe that there was a monster in our kitchen. Something taps on the window. What in the world? AJ stands. He runs towards the door and he grabs the knob. Hey, I say we go and just go to my house. The tapping gets louder, like hail on glass. I walk to the curtain and peer through the side, a face staring back at me. Its eyes red, its smile black. What do you want? I said. It floats away from the window, drifting off into the murky night. Something is written on the window. I lean in, turn my head to see what it says. It's the word lies. The light bulb in my room blows. A devious voice asserts itself from the corner of my room. It pleads in a joking tone and cackling laugh, breathing heavily between words. Be warned of the man beneath the hood, the black struggling veil, for he has a wicked tendency to tell you your untold future. He will ruin you. He will spite you with his words and cast your truth at the palm of his hand. Be warned of the truth of this two-sided man. The voice bounces around the room in a playful jig. Be warned of me, the two-sided man. Be warned of me, the two-sided man. Be warned of us, together we stand. The book drops down in front of me from the ceiling, and I tilt my head forward. He gets close to my face, his nose touching mine. His foul breath, smelling of dead animal. His voice darkens. Be warned. Be warned. Then he was gone, and so was AJ.
The Bitter End. 10 years ago, my friends and I went to our last abandoned building adventure. It was Melinda Dawn's house. It was Jason, Brandon, and I. My name is Jeremy. Our friend Nate was missing from the group that night. It turned out he just went missing in general. That night changed everyone in my friend group except me. Jason spoke of this terrifying black creature with an uncountable amount of limbs. He claims it tried to eat him, like it ate the cat and Melinda, he says. Brandon was our cameraman, and he never let anyone else see the footage of that night. He said he deleted every bit of it after he watched it. He claims there is a bear-like beast in most of the frames, and it now haunts his dreams. I'm the only one who wasn't affected by that night, though I guess some would say I was, because I'm obsessed with finding out what happened to Nate, Jason, and Brandon. I'm now an investigative journalist. I use my title as an excuse to go be nosy in places I probably shouldn't. For years I've wanted answers, and in the past few months I've been able to finally start searching for them. Audrey, the woman who owned the house that Nate disappeared from, had died. Her granddaughter, Nate's ex-girlfriend, Genevieve, had moved into the creepy little pink house. I asked Genevieve for an interview about Nate's disappearance, and I met her at her home. The interview went as expected. She didn't know anything, and neither did her grandmother, Audrey. She said she still missed Nate sometimes, and she had searched the woods behind the house several times. Even after the police had done so, she said she'd looked over it and over again. After the interview, she offered me a slice of cake. I asked if she could wrap some up for the road, as I was going to visit Brandon and Jason next. She left the living room, and I took the opportunity to snoop around. On the table lay a pen with a very viscous red liquid. It reminded me of blood. I also found an old journal with Audrey's name in it on the bookshelf nearby. I tucked it into my jacket and sat down just in time for Genevieve to return. She set a small cardboard box down in front of me. Inside the box were 3 slices of cake wrapped in tinfoil and sitting on a paper plate. I figured it would be easier to carry this way, she said, as she put the box in front of me. I thanked her, gathered my things, and I left. As I was about to buckle my seatbelt, I looked into the woods behind the house. I let go of it and got out of the car, quietly heading towards the woods. As I walked through, everything was completely quiet. Even the birds had stopped chirping. I walked for a few minutes and found nothing besides big clumps of black fur scattered everywhere. Eventually in the distance I saw what looked like a black bear. I froze. It turned towards me and I realized this was no bear. It raised up on its hind legs and dozens of other limbs seemed to materialize. It let out a blood-curdling screech and started towards me. I turned and ran as fast as I could towards my car. Luckily, the years that I had ran track in high school made me quick, and I reached the car before the thing had even reached the edge of the woods. I climbed in and quickly left the woods and the creepy pink house behind. Next, I was heading to Jason and Brandon's. Both had unfortunately been determined as disabled due to mental instability many years ago, and they lived together in a government-assisted apartment complex. On the way there, I drove by what was left of Melinda's house. About a year after our night there, the town deemed the place to be unfit for any person's use, and they demolished it. There were plans to build a new home over it, but the project ended up being abandoned after the workers were so scared by something that came out of the house when it was destroyed. One man claims it was a bear with extra limbs. The rest just described a blur of black fur screeching and running away into the woods. Now all that remained of the house was the foundation and some of the rubble from the destruction. I really didn't understand why my friends had been so freaked out after that night, at least not until now. I think the thing in the woods was the same thing that had been in Melinda's house and had traumatized Brandon and Jason. I tried not to think about it and kept driving, eventually pulling up to their apartment complex. I knocked on their door and Brandon answered. "Jeremy! It's so good to see you! Come in!" He led me inside. Jason was sitting on the couch watching TV. It looked like he was watching some old sitcom from our childhood. He waved to me as I walked in and gestured for me to join him on the couch. "I'll be over in a minute, Jason. I brought a little something for us all to snack on later." I gestured to the box that was in my hand. He nodded and I walked to the kitchen to set the box down. Brandon sat down at the table and started drinking some coffee. I went back to the living room and sat next to Jason. Most of the time when I came over, Jason didn't really speak much, and he just watched TV. We had a routine of sitting together, Jason watching TV and me reading a book. Today wouldn't be much different, though this was definitely a much different book than I had usually brought. I opened Audrey's journal and began to read. At first it was a boring little old lady's diary, but it suddenly took a dark turn. The journal detailed dozens of killings that Audrey had done. Most of them she had done on her own, with her trick of poisonous sweets. She ground up apple seeds and cherry pits into her baked goods, and her sweets were filled with cyanide. The journal also detailed what she did with the bodies afterwards. She would carefully drain them of blood and use it as ink in her strange pens. She would also use it for other rituals, as she described, though none of the entries went into much detail on that. The small bones she would grind up and use in paints for her porcelain doll collection. She even detailed that she made a doll to look like each of her victims. As I kept reading, I couldn't believe what she did with the bigger bones. She explained that one of her experiments went extremely wrong. She ended up with a thing that was full of limbs and seemed to lack a face. It made terrible screeching noises and shed frequently. She decided to trap the thing in an old abandoned house not too far from her own. She discovered that the thing hated bones, so once she had lured it inside, she buried bones around the perimeter of the house. Occasionally she went back to bury more bones, until a young woman moved into the home. She explained that she had to wait several months before she could go bury more bones, and had to start collecting them in her closet. The young woman living in the creature's house had vanished without a trace, and with a police investigation going on, Audrey couldn't get near the place. Eventually I ran into the same thing in her journal over and over. An unfortunate soul had been lured into Audrey's house, and she poisoned them and waited for them to die so she could use their body as a resource. And later she made one of her dolls look like her newest victim. The last entry is what I had been waiting for. Audrey talked about how she and her assistant, who she never named, had killed Nate, and they harvested what they needed from his body. She complained of her new assistant being sloppy. Whoever the assistant was, they had slit Nate's throat rather than waiting for the poison to kill him, and they started collecting his blood in a wine glass of all things. The assistant had to do most of the work according to the journal, and Audrey wrote, "I knew this would be my last kill." I hadn't looked up from when I began reading the journal, but when I did, I found Brandon and Jason eating the slices of cake I had brought. "No, don't eat that!" I ended up yelling, but I already knew it was too late. Shortly after I had looked up from the journal, I noticed Jason starting to seize, and Brandon had completely frozen in place. He looked completely stiff. It was too late to call 911. The journal said by the time the symptoms appeared, they couldn't be saved, and I didn't know where their phone was. I sat with Jason trying to make sure he didn't hit his head until the seizure stopped and his eyes closed. Both of them had died right in front of me. Without my friends and without my purpose of finding out what had happened to all of them, I didn't really have a reason to keep going. I put the journal down on the table and next to the couch and went to retrieve the last piece of cake. I sat down on the couch and quickly ate the entire slice. It tasted sweet like peaches, but it had the most bitter aftertaste I had ever encountered. I put the plate on the ground and laid down to take a nap.